Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of our webinar series, Inside Immigration. Today, we're joined by panelists at Green and Spiegel, Shoshana Green and Sonia Sidhu. Please feel free to ask any questions via the pop-up text bar on the right side of your screen, and we'll do our best to address them at the end. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them through the information provided now. And with that being said, I'll hand things over to our panelists.
Thank you, Danielle. So we'll get right into it. There was a fun announcement at Coalition this year that an H-1B open work permit temporary policy was coming out. It came out July 16th. It closed within 48 hours. It was basically for individuals that had valid H-1B specialty visas and were living in the US. They could get a work permit for 3 years. We know that these work permits right now cannot be extended. We'll see how this plays out in the future, if they're going to redo this. But right now, it's just opened and closed within 48 hours. And beyond that, there's no indication of this happening again, unless this goes really well. In terms of new pathways for permanent residency, we saw an announcement for a pathway for Ukrainians with family members in Canada. So by background, there was a Canada-Ukraine authorization for emergency travel launched in 2022, March, and it provided Ukrainians and their immediate family members the opportunity to come to Canada as temporary residents for up to 3 years. And if you applied before July 15th, the fees were waived. Now, this program is still around, but if you're now applying, you are subject to the fees and standard requirements. What the announcement entailed was that there was going to be a pathway introduced. This pathway is not going to require any financial undertaking from family members in Canada. It's also not going to be taking up positions from the parent and grandparent sponsorship program. But beyond that, they haven't announced how the program is going to work, what needs to be submitted, and we should really be getting information further in fall. So right now it's just, wait and hold and see what comes out later in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, with respect to the Ukrainian program, it's an interesting one because it from the government's perspective, it is, a situation where they didn't want individuals to make refugee claims with respect to the situation that's going on in the Ukraine, and it does provide this pathway for permanent residency. But of course, it would be helpful to have the details, but we don't know the details. It would appear to be pretty much about your Ukrainian nationality and your relationship with close family members here in Canada. That appears to be the only requirements, but of course, the individuals would have to meet that plus the admissibility issues, which there wasn't a lot of admissibility screening done when they processed the temporary measures, which were done very, very quickly. And now maybe that's the opportunity for the government to really hone down and evaluate these potential permanent residence applications. But it's a bit frustrating because it's an announcement of to be determined in the future. We know it's coming, but we don't know exactly what it means or how it will be processed. It's unfortunate that we really can't get the details to allow our clients to get ready for it and be prepared and have the appropriate information that the government will require come when that program does open. But it's kind of similar to what Sonia was just talking about with the H-1B program, that it opened, we didn't really know the details, and it closed. We'll see what happens if people actually come to Canada on those work permits. We'll see what happens. So many to be determined scenarios with Canada immigration, but they're always tweaking programs. And another tweak that they've brought about recently is for British youth. There's a new program that allows British youth to pursue work permits in Canada through what's called a young professional category, which allows Canadian employers to make job offers to British youth. And that definition of youth has now been expanded from 18 years old to 35, whereas before it was 30. And it allows Canadian employers outside of Quebec to allow them to bring youth with high-skilled job offers that are somehow related to their background, that they demonstrate they're able to perform without the requirement of a labor market impact assessment. There's not too much work to be done by the employer, so it just gives some flexibility for that particular segment of the population. So that's an opportunity for a segment of the population with UK passports. It's quite unique, only specific age group and only specific citizenship. So that's a new tweak that's come about that's helpful for those individuals. So we always give updates on express entry and permanent residence. Most recently, the government, as we've said in past seminars, have been targeting particular occupations and particular groups. And most recently, the targets have been French-speaking citizens, not French citizens, but French-speaking individuals, regardless of their country of nationality. The last round of invitations were on, the most recent was July 11th and July 12th. What was unique most recently with French-speaking individuals was how low the score was. The score being 375, which I think has been the lowest in a very, very long time, going back many, many years. And, you know, it gives the ability of individuals who are fluent in French to come to Canada who may not be that highly skilled possibly, or maybe they're older, or maybe they're not as well educated. It gives some flexibility for those individuals. Clearly, the government is trying to boost the French-speaking permanent resident population that they are processing, because the previous French targeted program was on July 7th, and the score was 439 points. So a pretty significant drop for those individuals. I mean, if you go back to all the draws this year, it's 375 is the lowest score. You know, we started in January, it was at 507. Highest it's gone this year, 511. But they are still, they had a healthcare specific draw back at the beginning of July. But the main draw, you know, the one for everybody, it's still high, 505 points. So we're, you know, everybody's still got to work on improving their language tests. I mean, those are pretty much the only thing they can control in this express entry world, language tests. So, you know, our advice is to keep at it and to, you know, attempt to make your profile as beneficial for you with respect to the point system as possible, because literally every point counts. And I'm going to, that's my advice on the express entry scenario. Pass it over to Sonia for the Ontario.
Yeah, interesting to see, like for the French invites, there was over like close to 6,000 invites in those two draws. That's very significant at that score. Where we had the STEM category-based selection, there's only 500 invites issued. And with these category-based selections, we've seen a rise in the non-category-based selection scores. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. Like this is like pretty much the first couple of draws that they've done the category-based selection. So, I mean, we can't say what the trends are really at this point. Give it a few more months, we can see how things are going to play out. But it'll be interesting to see if they're doing these category-based selections and if that's going to drive the non-category-based selections to the high levels of the 500s, well, then it's looking very difficult for a lot of people in Canada. Even people like that went to school here and have worked for a year. So we'll see how it all plays out, but that goes into the PNP programs, because now we'll see the PNP programs possibly targeting these groups that aren't getting these invites through express entry. What we've actually seen with the OINP is they're still inviting now, which is usually not the case. By this time, the draws have significantly decreased, but we saw 3 draws this month, all under the human capital priority stream. So what they did is they looked at the scores for these category-based selections, and they lowered the score to catch the other individuals that wouldn't have been selected in those rounds, which is really smart for the OINP to do. And it catches people that aren't meeting these high score cutoffs, or even the low cutoffs for French, because then it's going to tie these French speakers to Ontario.
I kind of wish the Ontario government and the federal government would talk to each other and have a plan. Doesn't seem like there's a plan of coordination. They just kind of do their own thing and wait and see what happens, which is very frustrating from a client perspective, because obviously we all want to have predictability and knowledge of how I can potentially become a permanent resident, and this just makes it a little more frustrating process. But you know, we're trying our best to help our clients navigate through this interesting maze of options.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because with the OINP, there was targets for technology draws, health draws, but now Express Entry has introduced that. So what does that mean for the PNP programs? Are they going to change? Are they going to lower the requirements? We'll all just have to wait and see what really comes out of this.
Yeah, it's I guess it's the most frustrating for international students who've come here, who've had the opportunity to graduate from Canadian schools, and we're probably told you could pursue permanent residence after you graduate. But with all the nuances and the tweaks the government has been putting in, it's really important that international students understand their obligations to maintain proper status. A lot of them have these pilot projects of extending their postgraduate work permits, which aren't really extensions of postgraduate work permits. They're these pilot policies that the government, was trying to help them post-COVID. But with the scores being so high, it's really important for international students to put themselves in the best situation possible to pursue permanent residence, because it's not as simple as it used to be. It's much more complicated to navigate through these different scenarios and through the different options. That's kind of my last piece of advice. International students are always getting the short end of the stick here, it seems.
Yeah, it was a pretty clear path previously, but now even hard for like us to navigate and figure out, hey, what's going to happen in the future here. So like I said, we just have to wait and see how everything plays out.
Yeah, and especially the Ontario government's options for master's grads, PhD grads, international students with a job offer, they're so limited and they're so unpredictable. It's really not a viable option. So Express Entry is the only one, but again, given the government's high thresholds on the scores, they really have to ensure that they maintain their status and potentially get extensions on those postgrads in the number of different ways that are available for them. But I think that's everything we wanted to cover with respect to this, the current situation of immigration right now. I think that's all we're at. Sonia, do we have anything else to chat about? I don't think so.
No, I think we're good, and I don't believe there's any questions at this time.
Okay, well, thank you. That's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and a special thanks to Shoshana and Sonia for sharing their expert knowledge. If you would like to discuss today's topics in more detail, please reach out and book a consultation. Their details can be found on the screen now. And I also encourage you all to sign up for e-alerts and follow us on social media to keep up to date on the latest developments inside Canadian immigration. Thanks again, and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Have a good day.